On February 24th, 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Despite the interference from superpowers like America, the UK, and the rest of Europe, the war continued to escalate quickly, becoming the largest conventional military attack involving a European nation since the Second World War. Today, the war is still going on, and as of 2025, this conflict has resulted in hundreds of thousands of military and civilian deaths, with Russian troops occupying about 20% of Ukraine, causing more than 8.2 million Ukrainians to leave the country, resulting in Europe's largest refugee crisis since the Second World War. Now the question here is, why did a country like Russia invade Ukraine? What was the actual reason behind this attack? Were it Ukrainian resources, the need for more land, Putin's arrogance, or something entirely different? To get a better understanding of this conflict, it's important to take a look at the history of Russia and Ukraine. If you take a look at the world map, this right here is Russia, and when we move towards Europe in the east direction, we come across Ukraine. So Ukraine was basically a part of the Soviet Union for several years, starting from 1922 till its end in 1991. During this time, Ukraine played a pretty important role for the Union because of its geographical location, contributing agriculturally, industrially, and strategically. In 1991, the Union finally collapsed, and as a result, Ukraine got its independence. Now at this point, Russia did recognize the sovereignty and independence of this newly formed nation. But somewhere in its policies, Russia's government still viewed Ukraine as a country that would remain in their influence. And this is where the problem started. The situation got a bit out of hand when a revolution in Ukraine resulted in the establishment of a pro-Western government, in place of a previous pro-Russian one. So, in response to this, Putin's Russia occupied and annexed Crimea, the giving reason that they were doing so for the protection of ethnic Russians and the strategic interests of Russia. Because of this sudden action, immediate sanctions were implemented on Russia by the US and most of Europe. To make the situation even worse, in the same year, pro-Russian separatist groups declared independence in different parts of Donbass, which started a long conflict between the Ukraine government and the separatists who were being provided with weapons, intelligence, and soldiers by Russia. But was this the only reason behind this invasion? Well, now that you're all caught up with the background, let's get into it. Expansion of NATO. Today it might be hard to believe, but there was a time when Russia, the UK, and America were on the same page. After the Nazi Germany fell, Russia and the US were on good terms. But this relationship soon became sour with the beginning of the Cold War. Now, after the Cold War, many countries that were previously a part of the Soviet Union joined NATO, including Poland and the Baltic states. This move obviously wasn't liked by Russia, who saw this as a direct betrayal of informal promises that were made by Western leaders in the early 1990s, saying that NATO will never expand towards the east. For Russia, the situation became even more alarming in 2008, when NATO declared that Ukraine and Georgia would soon become members too. With this announcement, the Russian government believed that their fear of the Western powers surrounding them was slowly becoming true. And with this fear, the efforts began to stop this move. A westernized Ukraine. As I told you earlier, even after the independence of Ukraine, Russia wanted the country to remain under its influence. But with the beginning of the 21st century, this started to change. The Orange Revolution in 2004 and the Euromaidan protests of 2014 made it abundantly clear that Ukraine, its government, and its people are tilting more and more towards Europe and America. From Russia's point of view, this would hurt its position in the region and weaken its authoritative position over its neighboring countries, the Russian world. But westernization of Ukraine or its future inclusion in NATO weren't the only reasons behind this invasion. In fact, many experts believe that Russia's attack on Ukraine was bound to happen, and it would have happened regardless of the country's tilt towards the West. Now the question here is why? Well, it's a well-known fact that Vladimir Putin has often spoken about the Russian world, a concept that includes native Russians and Russian speakers in former Soviet territories. According to Putin, Russians and Ukrainians are one people, an idea that's not accepted in most of Ukraine. In his speeches, Putin and his representatives have always maintained that the present-day Ukraine is geographically, ideologically, and historically a mistake, and it was wrongfully separated from Russia. To further propagate this idea, in Putin's regime, the idea of Russian nationalism has become very strong. And in this whole picture, the West has been shown as hostile and harmful to Russia's sovereignty. Now, seeing all these facts, it can be said that the invasion of Ukraine was done to materialize the concept of the Russian world. Now, another question that arises here is that all of these things have been going on since the early 21st century. So why the sudden attack in 2022? Causes of the invasion. Now coming into the 2000s and 20s, NATO's involvement with Ukraine was starting to increase even more. With a complete pre-Western regime in the office, Ukraine began to hold military exercises and receive heavy weaponry from countries like the United States and the United Kingdom. With the situation getting more and more tense, in 2021 and early 2022, several meetings were held with representatives of the United States, NATO, and Russia to de-escalate tensions. Putin's government put forward some demands, including a guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO. These demands were rejected, and after this diplomatic failure, Russia launched a full-scale invasion on 24th February 2022. The plan was simple when the invasion began: capture Kyiv within days, topple the government of President Volodymyr Zelensky, and establish a pro-Russian regime. From the beginning, this was one of the key motives of Putin and his government, with Zelensky being a target from the very beginning of the war. Russian troops even made 2 attempts to storm the presidential compound soon after the invasion. Even now, Putin continues to reject direct peace talks with Zelensky, and his officials call him a loser and a clown. Another goal of this invasion was to expand the Russian territory to eastern and southern Ukraine, including Donbass and cities like Mariupol and Odessa. This step would have severely affected Ukraine's economy and secured Russia's control over the Black Sea. Another potential benefit of this invasion was the Russian control over the resources of Ukraine. Donbass, particularly, is rich in coal and steel, while in southern Ukraine areas like Zaporizhia and Kherson have fertile agricultural land and developed energy infrastructure. Gaining control over these would have further weakened Ukraine economically and increased Russia's chances of winning the war. Politically, this invasion did a lot of good for Putin and his government. His regime got stronger and his position in the office gained a lot of strength. In addition to all this, other reasons for action at this specific time could have been an increase in confidence because of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lack of experience of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the after effects of invasion. Ironically, this invasion had the opposite effect on NATO. Western countries showed an immediate response after the invasion. On February 24th, 2022, an emergency meeting of NATO took place and a defense plan was formulated. The American government under Biden also announced military and economic aid for Ukraine. In addition to this, a series of sanctions were announced against Russian financial institutions and the country's elites. Many countries, including Canada, the UK, and others in Europe, also took part in these sanctions. On the other hand, aid towards Ukraine started to increase, and as of December 31st, 2024, this number has reached $430 billion. But these aren't the only effects of this invasion. As of January 2025, more than 90,000 Russian soldiers had died in the conflict, while on the other hand, more than 65,000 Ukrainian soldiers had also lost their lives. According to the Wall Street Journal, the total number of dead or injured between the two countries has reached 1 million, with more than 12,300 civilians. At this point, there can be several reasons that can be pointed out as the potential reason behind this invasion. One can argue that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was bound to happen, given the history of both countries. According to others, the authoritative figure of Putin and his love for power resulted in this attack. Whatever may be the reason, one thing is clear. The war has had the opposite effect in several ways. Ukraine's national identity has strengthened, NATO is expanding, and Russia is increasingly isolated. The conflict remains unresolved, with high human and economic costs on all sides. The world continues to watch closely, hoping for a just and sustainable peace. Let me know in the comments your opinion about this conflict and the reason behind this invasion. Also, make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an update